This podcast is not for the overly sensitive, the terminally optimistic, or anyone who thinks dating in your 50s is a whimsical romantic comedy. Listener discretion is advised.
More straight talk with Trent on Girls Can Tell.
There's a phrase people say all the time that sounds confident, rational, and reassuring. That can't happen. Or more specifically, they can't do that. You hear it everywhere. They can't fire you for that. It's illegal. They can't lie under oath. That's perjury. They can't harass you. That's against the law. They can't cheat, manipulate, or do something that outrageous. No one would risk it. Except people do. All the time. And once you've seen it happen up close, something in your brain rewires permanently. You stop assuming people won't cross certain lines. Because the rule book most people walk around believing in isn't how the world actually operates. The real world doesn't run on rules alone. It runs on consequences. And if someone thinks they won't face any, they'll do things you never thought they would. A lot of people walk through life believing the system works automatically. If someone breaks the rules, there are consequences. If someone lies, the truth wins. If someone crosses a line, the system steps in and corrects it. But that belief only lasts until you're standing there watching it not happen. I had that moment in a courtroom. I was there because I had a restraining order against someone. A serious situation. The kind where you expect the process to be straightforward. You go in thinking, tell the truth, show what happened, the judge sees the reality of it, and that's that. Except that's not always how it works. The other guy gets up and starts talking, and he lies. Flat out lying under oath. In front of a judge. Something I didn't even consider as a possibility before that moment. Because most people assume there are certain lines you just don't cross, and lying under oath is one of them. Except he crossed it. And not only did he cross it, he did it confidently, like he believed nothing would happen to him for doing it. And the strangest part of that experience wasn't even the lie. It was realizing that the outcome didn't hinge on who was telling the truth or what the actual details of certain events were. It hinged on what could be proven in that moment. Presentation, credibility, time, and evidence. And sometimes the truth doesn't win simply because it's the truth. It wins if it can be demonstrated clearly enough in the time you're given. If not, the system moves forward anyway. That realization changes how you see things. Not long after that experience, I ran into the same reality somewhere completely different. My apartment building. I had security cameras, actual video evidence of someone harassing me, illegally messing with my property, behavior that was completely unlawful, unacceptable, and frankly a little disturbing. The kind of thing where you think, this will be handled quickly. You bring the proof, you show the footage, management steps in, that's how it's supposed to work. Except it didn't. The property manager ignored it. The guy responsible was a convicted felon working in the building, and even with video proof, the response was basically silence. No real action, no accountability, nothing. Now, if you tell that story to most people, their first reaction is predictable. They can't do that. They can, and they do. The rule book doesn't enforce itself. If you want something to happen, suddenly the burden is on you. You have to escalate it, fully document every time and event, spend time dealing with it, hire a lawyer, maybe go to court. And that's when reality sets in. Most people don't have unlimited time, money, or energy to fight these battles, and the system clearly depends on that. We grow up with this idea that rules function like guardrails. Break them, and something automatically stops you. But rules are only as powerful as the consequences behind them. If someone believes the consequences are small, delayed, or unlikely, they'll test the boundary. And once you realize that, a lot of human behavior suddenly makes a lot more sense. Why people lie in situations where honesty would seem obvious, why companies often break their own policies, why someone might cheat, manipulate, or treat people badly even though they know it's wrong. Because the calculation in their head is about risk, not morality. If the risk feels low, people will do things everyone insists they wouldn't. People think this dynamic only exists in courts or workspaces. It doesn't. It might actually be the most destructive in relationships because that's where your defenses are lowest and your assumptions are most deeply buried. When you're with someone, you extend a level of trust that you never extend to a stranger or an employer. You assume a baseline. You believe that the intimacy you've built creates a kind of invisible contract that person across from you has agreed to implicitly. to certain rules. They wouldn't lie about something that matters. They wouldn't go looking for something outside this. They wouldn't risk what we've built for something meaningless. Those feel like reasonable assumptions, but they're not guarantees. I learned that firsthand. I was in a relationship with someone I trusted completely. We were building something real, or at least I thought we were. And while that was happening on my end, she was cheating. Not a moment of weakness or a single lapse. A sustained, deliberate choice made repeatedly over time. When I found out, the first thing I thought was confusion, because I genuinely believed she wouldn't do that, because a version of her in my head made it seem impossible. She had too much to lose, knew what honesty meant to me, and understood what betrayal had cost me before. None of that mattered, because her internal calculation had nothing to do with my assumptions. She wasn't thinking about the contract I believed we had. She was thinking about what she wanted, what she could get away with, and whether the consequences would ever actually reach her. That's the psychology underneath it. Cheating, manipulation, sustained deception in relationships. None of it happened because somebody suddenly forgot the rules. It happened because someone made a decision that the rules didn't apply to them right now. The risk was manageable. They could compartmentalize it. You'd never find out. Or if you did, they could manage that too. It's an emotional cost-benefit analysis. And the person being betrayed is always the last one running that calculation because they already assumed it was off the table. That's what makes it so disorienting when it happens. You weren't naive or stupid. You made a reasonable assumption on human behavior. The problem is that reasonable assumption didn't account for people who've decided the rules are optional. What makes it worse in midlife dating specifically is, by the time you're in your 40s or 50s and back in the dating pool, you've usually been through enough that you think you can read people. You've developed filters and gotten better at spotting red flags early. But experience can create kind of a blind spot. You start believing that someone who seems emotionally intelligent, self-aware, and communicative simply wouldn't behave that way. That maturity is a form of protection. It's not. Maturity means they're better at managing the appearance of accountability. So the same question applies in relationships that applies in courtrooms and property management offices. It's not, would they do that? It's, what actually stops them? Another uncomfortable truth here is systems are built for the average case, not every case. Courts are overloaded, companies protect themselves first, property managers avoid liability and conflict whenever possible. None of that is necessarily personal, but when you're the person caught in it, it feels very personal, because you walked in expecting the rules to protect you, and instead you discover something else entirely. The rules exist, but enforcing them is a separate process, and that process often requires resources, time, evidence, persistence, sometimes money or connections, or both. Most people assume justice is automatic. In reality, it's often procedural. Once you've experienced this kind of situation a few times, your perception shifts into realism. You stop saying, they can't do that, and start asking, what actually stops them? Consequences, exposure, and leverage stops people, but the rules themselves don't. That's the difference. And understanding that difference changes how you see things in the world. Some people hear this idea and think it's cynical. But that's not what it is. It's awareness. There's a big difference between assuming everyone will behave badly and understanding that people are capable of it. Awareness just means you stop being surprised when it happens. You protect yourself better, document things when you need to, pay attention to patterns instead of relying on assumptions, and stop believing certain things are impossible simply because they shouldn't happen. Because both personal and the world history shows us something very clearly. People do things every day that someone somewhere insisted they would never do. The lesson isn't that rules are meaningless. Rules, laws, and systems matter, but they only work when someone has the ability and willingness to enforce them. Without enforcement, rules become suggestions, and once someone realizes that, their behavior often changes. So the real shift is to stop building your expectations around what people are supposed to do. Start building them around what people are capable of doing and what actually exists to stop them. Capability tells you more about reality than the rulebook does. Everyone has that moment where they realize the world doesn't work exactly the way they thought it did. Maybe it happens in a courtroom, at work, or in a relationship where someone crosses a line you were certain they never would. That moment is uncomfortable and clarifying. Once you understand that people can do almost anything when they believe the consequences won't reach them, you start paying attention to the only thing that actually regulates behavior: consequences.